My name is Chaplain Jack C. Standfield. I live here in Huntsville. I've been here 25 years. And I'm a licensed and ordained minister. I'm the chaplain for the VFW, the Huntsville Memorial Hospital, and the Hearts Association Veteran Museum. And I count this a privilege to be able to tell you some of the things that I had to go through with in my life. I was drafted the first time in 1942, November the 22nd. I was at Annapolis, Maryland, and I was drafted, but they put me in 4F. And then in December of 44, they drafted me again, and I went through basic training and went to the South Pacific. I went to several different islands. I went from Pearl Harbor up to Attu. From Attu, I went to Yap. From Yap, we didn't attack Yap because it was too small and not enough people there. We went from there to Eniwetok. Things was under control there, so they took us to Okinawa to mop up. The Marines had already gone through and left, as far as I'm concerned, most of the Japs in the caves and along the shores of the line and up in the rocks above the mountains. If you're old enough, you might remember the Battle of the Clouds, and that's because the mountain had a cloud hang over it all the time. It hung from morning till night, about halfway up the mountain. And the Japanese were above the clouds, and we were below. They had highly had the advantage on us. And they continually dropped knee mortars. They could put them in your pocket if they could see you well. They could put them right in your pocket. I had no contact with the Japanese face-to-face in my entire Army life except for one time. And that was just about the time the war was over. I was lying in a foxhole facing the North China Sea with my foxhole buddy. His name was Stucker. He was looking one way and I was looking the other. And there had been some bombing going on every day at the water edge, and we were about 100 yards from the water over a little knoll. And we were dug in, and we'd been there since for days, I don't know how many. But these people came up to us, started walking up to us, these Japanese people. There were 3 of them, and they had their hands above their head and had grenades around their waist. I didn't know but what they were ready to attack us or whether they were trying to fool us or what they were doing. But I began to punch Stucker and tell him to wake up and let Stucker. I said, there's some Japanese, Japanese. And I finally got it over to him that was being attacked or something. And of course, he turned around and we got ready to shoot. And just about the time we was going to pull the trigger, we'd already talked about which one we were going to hit. Up shows the GI's head in the back with a rifle in his hand. He had captured him along the coast. They'd been throwing grenades in the water, kill fish before it got light, and then they'd pick up the fish when they came to the top and go back into the caves. And of course, this was very disturbing because you look every day, every night, you lay there at night and you pray for day to come. It was kind of humorous because you didn't want them catching you that night, slipping up on you and killing you. As soon as it got light, you start praying for that day to come tonight because you didn't want to get killed standing out in the daytime. And that's the kind of life we lived for the longest time. And I think it's better put, we did what we had to do to stay alive. I was the most fortunate, soldier in the Army. I never got a scratch, no place on my body, not even from a sea ration can. In Eniwetok, I was chosen to take care of cleaning up the ship. And 85 of us were left aboard the ship to clean up. I never went ashore. Okinawa, we pulled in, I was chosen again. I chose from random. One of the 87 men that cleaned up the ship for 3 days before I ever went ashore. But I dreaded the day even I got there because the men weren't too far up there, and I joined a company that had 28 men in it, left from a battle. And then from that, the next day we joined another company together with 7 men from a B company of a heavy artillery. They joined up with us. And that's the kind of life we lived. We lived out of our mess kits and cans. We had water from tank tracks, from bomb holes, or from the rain at night we caught in our helmets. We lie in foxholes from day and night. We finally got some tents, but before that we lay in foxholes all day and all night and just move around. If you had to go to the bathroom, you did it in your helmet. The urination and the human waste both in your helmet. If you had food you had to warm, you washed out your helmet and you warmed your food in the helmet. People didn't like to believe that, but that's what happened. It didn't bother us in the least because we was doing it to save our lives. I was a platoon guide because my platoon sergeant, my platoon guide, and one of the other sergeants in the company got killed the first or second day I was there. And I was made the platoon guide, a staff sergeant. And I stayed with the captain. We finally got a captain in order. There was no, by the way, there was no officers in the company when we joined them. We got a captain in there, Captain Banier came with us, and then we got a few lieutenants. But no one knew who no one was because there we wore the same kind of clothes. We talked the same way. We used nicknames and last names. You never called anybody by their name or their rank. You never did show any rank. You might have a captain right in the middle of a platoon, or you might have him the last man in the platoon. It depends on what the situation was. But the Japanese enjoyed picking off the officers, the forward guards. After they got by, they would pick them off. You knew then a battle was somewhere. They were all around you, sometimes behind you, on both sides of you, in front of you, and you had no help. We were caught there. But luckily, I happened to be in the back, always in the back. And I was back from the company, and I had a chance to always get away and go back and get help if help was needed, or whatever the situation might be at that particular time. And God was good to me. Because I had a wife and a child at home I wanted to come back to. We were married before the war. I've been married almost 60 years now to the same beautiful bride. I know it's hard, but I'm not ashamed of crying. That's a life that I lived years ago. We've never talked about it until I joined the Veterans of Foreign Wars. And that got me talking about some of it, and then now all of it in this museum. I've been with them 6 years. It's all volunteer work. Whatever we do, whatever we say, it concerns this museum here, the Arts Veterans Museum. And everything done here is volunteer. My son painted the building in here. We had people from all walks of life to give money to the volunteer for the equipment, for paint and stuff of that nature. And the workers that could, I'm disabled, I can't do it, but there were people that could, hung pictures, cleaned up, and did things of that sort. I ran errands and answered the telephone and things like that. But that was just life here. But back to the war.
Could you maybe just describe for the viewers a typical day, while you were in the war?
Well, there's no such thing as waking up and going to sleep at 9 o'clock and waking up at 6 like that. You live in a foxhole, and part of my job as the platoon guide was to assure that we had ammunition, water, and food for the troops. When we moved up on the Mount Osaka there, Valley of the Clouds, the weasels that brought the food up, and they were a tank-type vehicle with no top on it. It was full of food. It was amphibious and also would run on the ground. But it couldn't get to us because of the coral rock. Okinawa, as you know, is mostly coral rock. And I would have to go back and get it if they could get to them or they could get to us. And I would sure the men had water in the morning. There would be an officer if we had one, or another non-com. And I, at that time, was acting staff sergeant from getting promoted in the field. And we would bring the water up as far as we dared get to the men, and they would come back in small groups of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 10. Never over that many. And they stayed apart. You didn't come together. And our job was to actually give them water. I'd take my canteen and I'd fill it up out of a Lister bag if we had water. You got to keep that in mind, because a lot of times I got my canteen full, like I said, from a tank track or a bomb hole or out of a rock spring. Excuse me. So something of that nature. I would fill my canteen and put one halazone tablet in it. And I had a pocket full of quinine and Atirin, because malaria was rampant in the islands at that time. And we had to assure, we had a roster, and the officer, if he was there, or the other non-com, these men would come up and give their names, and they would open their mouth and stick the tongue out as far as they could. And I would throw an Atirin tablet right down their throat and let them have a drink of the water. And the way their water was gotten to them, I would take one capful of my water and pour it into their canteen, and then they'd fill it from the Lister bag, or they'd find water someplace else. Or we had another canteen or two sitting around, and we would allow them to drink that. We had to be sure they had that Atirin tablet. And then that 2 or 3, 5 or 10 people would walk off, and some more would come. But this was an everyday thing, that you got his water, you got his rations, you got his ammunition, to be sure he had ammunition, if it was possible. We never really gave out of ammunition. Now, during the banzai, before my time, I was not in a banzai ever, but one just before I came aboard the group, there had been a banzai, because there was 28 left in that company.
What is a banzai?
A banzai is when the Japanese are numbered up in the hills, or maybe in the jungle, or wherever they might be. And you can hear them singing about a banzai. And they sing something with I-O to it. It means that with the day we die for the emperor. And they're drunk on mostly opium. They had opium pipes. I have one out here in my memorabilia. Opium pipes and opium pouches. And they would get highly, highly intoxicated. They took off all their clothes, which was nothing but maybe a band or a pair of pants or something. They had no shirts, no shoes. And they would take off, and they'd take off all the ammunition, leave their rifles in there. They would come down maybe 10 at a time, just walk right into your forward guard. He'd try to stop them, and he'd shoot 1 or 2 of them, and the guards on each side would rise and shoot the rest of them. A few minutes later, here come 25 or 50 more, maybe even more than that. And they'd fall right where their buddies were, because we'd shoot everything coming. That would happen 2 or 3 times, and each time they would increase the number. And then all of a sudden there were thousands of them coming, or hundreds. It seemed like thousands. They had rifles, bullets, grenades, mortars, the knee mortars, and there we were without ammunition. We'd been shooting these idiots that were drunk. And so we had no choice but to get up and haul a buggy. And if you want to know somebody can run with rifle and pack and flags and all that kind of stuff and everything I had to carry, you're looking at one. How could I run the best race in the world? I could find a hole or something. God gave me a place to hide every time. And I was really proud, and I thank the Lord daily about it.
It sounded like kind of a guerrilla tactic.
It does in a way, and the jungles were worse, different from that, but I was never really in a tight jungle because the islands I was on was always bombed ahead of us, 30 or 40 days, and the trees were cut off, and there wasn't much places to hide except rocks and bomb holes and things of that sort. Now you could find dugouts where the Japanese had dug out, and you could go in a cave if you had enough nerve. There were supposed to be burying caves, but the Japanese used them for their own quarters. And they would dig into the mountain, back into the mountain, and then they'd drop down 10 or 12 foot, and they would go this way or that way, and the tunnels were actually endless. And we would have to go in at times. On one occasion, the only time I carried a flamethrower was our flamethrower got shot, and we had to burn out a bunch of men that were in a group. There were some officers, I understand now, and I was frightened to death because that's one of the main people, like the officers and the guard, that they want to shoot. They want to shoot that flamethrower because he can really cause them misery. And we burned out this cave, and we went in that night, and we wanted to dare each other to sit on these bodies and open our rations and have pictures made of us. One guy had a camera and make little pictures about that large, that square, but we had pictures made of that. And on one occasion, there was a dead Japanese soldier, and we had a bayonet stuck through him in the rifle, and we would take turns going to the rifle and act as we were stabbing this soldier. And and we sent these pictures home, and my mother got one, and she disowned me. She wrote me a letter, said she'd never write me again because she disowned me. But she said, mainly because my brother had even done worse than I had. He was in this Navy at the age of 15, and he'd been overseas most of his career. And he was in all of the wartime, because he was in 5.5 years, and he got a Purple Heart. But when they took the Philippines back over, they were in that battle with MacArthur, and they went ashore, and he and a boy named Stanley, my brother's name was Arnold Standfield, who, by the way, is 4 years younger than I, and is in the hospital in the nursing home with Alzheimer's now. But he was in the Navy 5.5 years. And when they were in the Philippines, they went up to the mountains and found some huts, and they bought 7 Japanese heads that were cut off right there, and they had a 3/8 of an inch rod running through their ears, ear to ear, had them on a long piece of rod, and they were taking pictures and grinning, and they paid $1 a piece for these heads, and my mother disowned both of us. I didn't think anything at all. Like when we landed in Japan, I'll get a little ahead, then I'll come back to the actual landing. But we were taught to get rid of everything in the way. If an old lady, and that's all they had, there was old women, young girls, and children. There were no men. If a kid was 10 or 12 years old, he was a fighter. He was on some island somewhere. And we could show, if we go in and they'd bow down to us, all the way to the floor. And if they were in our way, we'd just kick them right in the top of the head and just walk right on over them. Like it wasn't anything. I couldn't believe today that I did that. I'd kick children. You know, they were in my way, I just kick them out of my way. People said the Japanese were terrible people. They said the Germans were terrible people. They weren't no worse than we were. In some areas they might have been. And the monumental killings and things of that sort. We did take care of some prisoners if we needed prisoners. Now, if we captured people that didn't need prisoners, somebody shot them. We had no room for baggage because we were moving just about all the time, one way or the other. we would move pretty fast. We left some things sometime when we carried some things. But back to I was at Naha Strip. It was an airstrip that the Japanese like to take every 2 or 3 days and then lose every 2 or 3 days. It was kind of a seesaw thing, and we have a man that works here in the museum with us. His name is Walter Vinson. He was an officer, and he was in the Seabees. And, of course, I didn't meet him. I didn't meet him at that time. I didn't meet him until I met him in the museum. He's a worker, a volunteer here at the museum. But Walt used to come up and put those strips back down every time I'd blow them up. and so we'd get some planes with food or something in there and ammunition to land. But by the time they landed and got off, the Japanese taking it over again. And we had to wait. Then they'd do the same thing, bring some of that stuff in. And then they'd booby trap it so we couldn't have it, but they had to blow it up and then put it back together. Well, I got out of the infantry and got into the engineers. I thought I'd be safer. I didn't know I got to do things like that. So I was in 27th Division first. That's this lower patch. And then I transferred over to I re-enlisted into the combat engineers. And of course, this is a life member patch of the VFW. And we don't have anything here in the museum to identify us, except some of the people wear badges. I wear my regular chaplain badge. But they flew a plane over. Now, first of all, they announced to us over loudspeakers from somewhere. I don't know where this voice came from, that the war was over. It was about I hadn't been on the island but a few days, and it was about the middle of August, somewhere around, well, I guess the 1st of August. I'm sorry, it was the last of July. And some of the men threw their rifles away, fired ammunition in the air, the machine guns, they fired them, they burned up. They shot 405 shells on them. The neighbors was out there blowing up the whole world. And then voice came back and said it wasn't over. Get your positions. For 3 days, the war wasn't over. Then they told us if we see a white plane with a large green cross on the bottom, we could assure us that the war was over. We'd get out of our holes. Well, by that time, we'd already set up tents, living in tents, right along the water. You'd think it was everywhere except it was coral rock. Cut you every time you touched it. And we lived right there, and we saw this plane come over. Well, we immediately went to the airstrip because they had told us we had to go to the airstrip. They didn't tell us why. But Tokyo Rose continually said that the 27th Division was wiped out. And it was almost wiped out, really was. But it said it was wiped out. And for some reason, I suppose they wanted to make a show that we were not wiped out. Of course, we all were 19, 20, 21 years old then. And we just got in a whole bunch of new guys just out of basic training, 19 years old, some of them 18. And we didn't look like veterans. Well, I might have, because I'm a little older than they were. But we had a regular army of people in with us. It was one good thing. But we went to Naha. Second plane took off Naha. The 11th Airborne was the leaders. But the 27th Division followed with them. And the way I was told by the plane and by the master there at the landing strip, I was on the second plane that touched on Japanese soil. And they told us our duties was to guard wherever they put us during the signing of the peace. Well, being an engineer, I thought maybe I would go down and guard the dock or take care of the dock and clean the mines out and things of that sort. But they reminded me I hadn't got into engineers yet. I was still in the infantry. They did that about a month later. And so they put us on guard in Atsugi Air Base so that they couldn't get a plane. There was no planes there, but they couldn't get a plane and land there for any reason to reload and get back over to Big Mo, sitting in the harbor waiting for General MacArthur to come aboard and sign the peace. But then we all closed in down toward the waterfront for the peace signing. And immediately after the peace signing, they blew some whistles and did a few things like that, a horn or whatever the Navy called it. And we started marching. All we had was a suit of khakis we'd been given on Okinawa, a change of socks and a change of underwear. And when we marched to a town 25 miles toward the north, I don't know exactly where, it wasn't due north because we'd have been in Yokohama, but we went 25 miles to a place called Hachiochi. And it was the cavalry station for the Japanese army. Had all the horses in the stalls and stuff like that. Everything was blown away, but except some of the stalls, concrete was still there. But we stayed there a few days, and then we got aboard train and went to a place called Niigata up in northern Honshu, facing the North China Sea. And it was cold up there. In fact, that's where the emperor had his winter quarters. It was at Niigata. And we went to Niigata, and just my company was the only bunch there. We took over the Bandai barracks, which was the officers, the policemen, and soldier barracks of the area that guarded the Hirohito when he was up there. And we took over that barracks, and the floor was so thin that we would fall through it just walking. Of course, we was loaded down with a pack. We had a pack, and our gear, all of our gear, and we made them do the whole building, another floor on top of it, and we had to sleep on the floor on a blanket. Well, then it got cold. It was turning around November then, and it was cold up there in those mountains. And finally, MacArthur said he'd going to come to see us. It was some general, I can't even remember his name, one of MacArthur's assistants came up. Well, I never did get to see MacArthur up there. I mean, I didn't get to talk to him. He was there among the group, but I talked with one of the other generals a few times. But because I was a staff sergeant, that was a lot. But I was a corporal more than anything else. You look at the pictures out here, you can see me all grades. I'm not going to tell you why I got busted, but anyway, you see me all kind of grades, from a private all the way up to a master sergeant. But I got knocked out of that several times, and I ended up a staff sergeant when I retired. But up in Niigata, when MacArthur came up there and found out it was so cold, we had one guard. We closed the back gate and locked it. And we had a guard out in front, and he wore army blankets around him, and completely around him. He didn't have no place to look, because nobody was going to bother us anyway, but old women and little children. They were all around us. They were begging for food. And we had this idea, when they would open the gates to let them clean up and things, they would head for the mess area. Well, we had garbage cans out there, and try to get over in the garbage cans and get some food. And we caught them, we'd take the children by the legs and just dip them down in like this and send them on their way. And we thought it was funny, and it was something to do. And we were just taught that way. I can't believe that I could ever be that kind of a person. But the Lord had saved me. And my life turned around as soon as I got out. And I wanted to go to Howard Payne, and I wanted to go to Baylor. I got enough money to go to Baylor 2 years, but I didn't make it because I built a house and lost my shirt. I didn't get to go. So my pastor got me into the seminary, Southwestern Baptist Seminary at Fort Worth. And so I went to the seminary, and I didn't finish. I need 10 hours to finish, but I got from 185 pounds down to 122 pounds. I was pastoring a full-time church, not getting paid, drawing $121 from the government a month. Of course, they paid for my books. And I went to school there for a year and a half. I like 10 hours of finishing. But I was pastoring this church. I was working 2 or 3 days a week. I only took 16 hours of full-time, as low as you could be, and still draw full-time. And I studied for the ministry. And from there, I went downhill to 122 pounds. And my mother just begged me to quit, and I quit and went into a civil job and pastored my church both. And God just led me into it, but He's protected me before and since.